Hey guys, it's Jamie, bringing you recovery-inspired hope. And this is Friday Night Live. And tonight I have my great friend, Ralph Schreibner with me. Ralph I've known for a really long time. I've known him from pretty much day one of his journey here. And so I'm so excited. He's gonna talk to us and tell us a little bit about himself and his pathway and his recovery journey. So Ralph, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
All right. I came out to Athens about 2 years ago. I had been struggling with heroin addiction for a long time, about 11 years. Very steadily, I'd become homeless, unemployed, lost pretty much everything I ever had. Prior to that, I'd been using other drugs and substances for about 15 years, so polysubstance user most of my life. The last 2 years, I was in active addiction. I overdosed around 25 times.
Oh my goodness.
Been revived by Narcan, about 16 of those. I was just fortunate to receive CPR or wake up on my own the other times. And I finally realized that I was not going to live much longer unless I got clean and got some help. And that is what I ended up doing. I came to Athens, I found a treatment facility, and began the long process of recovering.
Wow. And you said, how many times were you revived by Narcan?
About 16.
16 times. And wow, thank God for the funding that we have.
Right.
And the harm reduction and the Georgia Overdose Prevention, that they come in and teach people how to use Narcan.
I owe them my life. Literally.
Yes. Wow. Wow. So how long have you been sober?
2 years now, just over 2 years, about a week over 2 years.
Yay, happy birthday.
Thank you.
Awesome. So tell us about what happened that you made a decision that you wanted to do something different.
Well, it was a combination of things, I suppose. First of all, being addicted to heroin is a nightmarish scenario. You wake up in withdrawal every day.
Yep.
Towards the end, like I said, I'm consistently overdosing. That was scary, to say the least. I couldn't hold a job anymore. I was homeless for all intents and purposes, staying on a couch in the ghetto. And I was 42 years old. So I didn't really see any hope for my life. I didn't see myself acquiring any stuff again, living in a house again, being able to afford rent anywhere. I was unemployable. Every time I got a job, I would do something like overdose in the bathroom. And
oh goodness.
Eek. And
doesn't make
it sounds
good.
crazy, right? Because I had a pretty good upbringing. But that's how it ended up. I knew deep inside that I was going to die if I kept using, and I was suffering from mental health issues. It was deeply depressing. I had a college degree. I never imagined myself being a junkie living in the ghetto, homeless, and when you wake up every day and say, how did my life get this way? It's hard after a while to find the strength to do anything about it, because then it's a repeating cycle of drowning the depression with the drugs, then getting depressed that you've done that, but it's hard to get out of with no money, no resources, no belongings, no self-respect. So drowning in hopelessness was a daily thing for me. Fortunately, the Georgia Overdose Prevention Foundation, as you mentioned before, there was one of the founders of that organization. She was coming to see me every month. This was from a chance. I met her through my cousin who had a son that overdosed, and she had been introduced to this person. And she would come to see me once every few months in the ghetto to just call me on the phone and meet me at a gas station and give me bags of overdose kits that my roommates ended up having to use on me constantly. I only know that I've overdosed 16 times because of the amount of kits that she gave me over the last year and a half I was out there. And them being used. So, just counting empty boxes is, and more likely than not, the amount of actual overdoses, even well over 25, because I'd had so many over the years prior to that, that, I was fortunate to be revived from one way or the other. But I met with this person one day. She asked me if I'd go to treatment, and I was dying to get treatment, honestly, like any way out of this lifestyle. By this point, I was just 100% ready. I mean, I was well aware of the fact I was a drug addict, that I was physically dependent on the drugs. I would tell people I was a junkie, so there was no disputing it for me that I needed help and was definitely ready to get it. I just had no money, no health insurance. I didn't know how I was going to. So when she asked if I would go to treatment, if she could find a place, I was like, yes, I would be happy to. I just said it has to be cheap enough, basically free, that I could get in. And she got back to me a week later with the name of a place. I was in contact with them over the next month or so, and I finally got in by the grace of God. A number of circumstances lined up perfectly. Somebody paid the small admission fee for me, and it was a working program, so I could come out here and pay some of my fees as I went along. I was barely able to work because of all the mental health issues. That really took me a long time to get to a place where I was just capable of going to a job every day. There's just a lot of emotional, spiritual, physical damage from the drug use, the overdosing. When you tell a regular person, like, I can't handle working, they think you're lazy, but it's a lot more than that when you have like 26 years of substance abuse behind you and 11 years of a debilitating physical dependency. It becomes something of a whole different animal that has to be treated in many ways. Right.
Wow. So tell us about the pathway that helped you get well.
Sure. So I knew, as most people with a serious opioid dependency know, we're going to get sick, very sick, and go through withdrawals if we're going to quit using the drugs. This is what discourages us from day to day from trying to quit.
Would you do me a favor and explain to, say, our audience who doesn't know what it's like to have withdrawal?
Sure.
What is that like?
You'll commonly hear it referred to as the worst flu you've ever had times 100. That's basically accurate. You have muscle cramps and spasms, cold sweats, hot chills, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, uncontrollable yawning, uncontrollable lots of body processes. The first 24 hours, you can pass out like you're dead to the world, but then the following every hour after that for the next couple weeks, you won't be able to sleep at all because your blood pressure skyrockets, anxiety, panic attacks. It's just your body basically goes into kind of a complete freak out because it's so depressed all the time from the opiates that once the levels start to return to normal, everything skyrockets. Like uncontrollable muscle spasms, restless legs. It really drives you crazy, but you're also sick and panicking on top of it. It's pretty incredibly horrible process. And that's also the reason that opiate addicts will steal and do whatever they have to get drugs. It's not just because they want to get high, because inevitably after you've done those kind of drugs long enough, you're basically just trying to stay well.
Right.
They stop having the same effect on you anyway, and you really just are trying not to be sick from day to day.
Yes.
Because once it progresses long enough, you don't have the money to get high anymore. You're just barely can manage, enough to get a shot to stay well, and that's what most addicts will call it, staying well, after enough years. So that's what the withdrawal process is like.
Right.
And one of the side effects of being revived by Narcan is immediate withdrawal as well.
Wow.
So if you can imagine, every time that I was revived, I wouldn't have any idea what was going on, or even that I'd overdosed, and I'd be waking up a minute later after being given the Narcan in basically what would amount to like 48 hours worth of withdrawal instantly. So I'd be running to the bathroom, vomiting, the diarrhea would start already, the skin would be burning, and towards the end, one of my main motivations for quitting was just so I wouldn't have to be revived again.
Yes, I can see that you wouldn't want to do that again.
It was a horrible thing to experience, and it kept happening more and more. So I was getting like a reverse tolerance to the heroin. Aside from all the fentanyl that's out there now causing so many problems, my particular physiology was that even heroin without fentanyl was causing me to overdose less and less amounts of it, and even bad heroin that wasn't that great, so to speak, would just, it was happening frequently, and it was a nightmare. And the last day I used, I overdosed twice in the same day.
Wow.
The second time I fell on the floor having seizures, what I was told. So after that day, at the end of that day, I just kind of made a decision that I wasn't going to use anymore. I had to stop, like, no matter what. And fortunately, I was already in the process of speaking to the treatment center.
Right.
And I was able to get out here about a month later.
Okay. And that was when you started into the treatment of your pathway.
Correct.
And tell us about that.
Yes. So, and this is, I guess, where I was going before. So because of the withdrawals, I had initially told the person who asked me if I would go to treatment, I said, yes, I would go to treatment, but it would have to cost next to nothing, and I need to be somewhere where they would let me be on some sort of medication-assisted treatment. I tried quitting many times over the years using Suboxone, which is a drug that will keep you from being sick, but will not get you high. So it works enough to fill your receptors and keep the withdrawal symptoms away, but not enough to actually change your mood or alter that. If you have a tolerance to the drugs to begin with, if you're dependent on them. Some people will use the drug to actually get high, but those are people who don't have a physical dependency. And that's a big difference there.
Okay, so Suboxone was your pathway.
And I knew from using it in the past when I maintained a doctor's appointment for Suboxone once a month towards the end of my addiction because I was trying to quit.
Yes.
But the cravings for the actual drug and to get high were so strong that, I'd routinely go off of the Suboxone and start using heroin again. And then I would just do that for months. I'd sell the Suboxone. This is a common problem, people trying to treat themselves with medication where, they call it medication-assisted treatment because the medication is only assisting a drug treatment, counseling, therapy program. And if you don't have that component, it just doesn't work. I don't know anybody, and I've literally known dozens of people to try to treat themselves with Suboxone or just go to a doctor's appointment on their own. They never quit using the heroin. They always return to it because it's not managed. They're not getting the counseling and therapy they need, and the cravings are just too strong. The opiates are the kind of a drug that once you become physically dependent, your mind is also dependent, and it will override any common sense or logical chain of thought that you have that would try to keep you off of it. Your brain's actually craving it itself.
Wow.
So it's it's a hard thing to do on your own. But I
Yeah.
knew that if I was going to be treated, I couldn't be sick for a month because I was addicted enough that I just knew myself. I'd leave treatment, I'd go get high again, I'd get heroin so I'd feel better, and writhing around in pain for weeks, was not my idea of how I wanted to try to quit. And now I know a lot of people do that, and more power to them if they've been able to make it through that. Most of them will do it in jail.
Right.
People
Yes.
don't just subject themselves to that on their own. There's maybe a very small handful of people that have just locked themselves in a room and withdrawn from heroin and not gone back out to make themselves feel better. And
Right.
I don't know how, personally. I mean, if they can do it, then it's a miracle. And the people who have to do it in jail, my heart goes out to,
Yes.
because I
Yes.
personally could never have done it. I used to say that I was a real baby about withdrawal, but I literally would get every withdrawal symptom. So every symptom that I mentioned to you earlier,
Yeah.
some people get, a percentage of those. I get every single one when I would get
Wow.
sick. So it was incredibly hard to bear, physically, emotionally, mentally. It was unbearable.
It was
to me.
almost like you didn't have a choice.
Right.
Yes. So it was like you really didn't have a choice whether you were going to put in or not, because, either go through all that
Yeah.
or not. That's not even a choice.
Right.
Right.
And very likely you end up in an emergency room where they don't do anything for you anyway, and you generally get treated badly because the reason you're there is for being on drugs in the first place.
Right.
And, it's a shame that, not everybody has this experience, but
Yes.
healthcare professionals just don't really look too kindly on people coming in and using services, because they got themselves addicted to drugs.
Right.
And that's their view. They got themselves addicted to drugs, where there might be a number of factors leading up to that.
Right.
And nobody
Absolutely.
ever chooses to live that
Right.
lifestyle, but they end up that way like I did. And, and then once you get that way, your options are very limited as far as maintaining it or getting better.
Right, right. And, the medication-assisted treatment is really kind of up and coming out into the open. And there has been a huge stigma attached to it.
Sure.
And I'm going to tell you my honest story. I had a girl that I knew. She was actually in my Celebrate Recovery class. She was in my class for over a year. Stellar scholar, beautiful, just had her recovery, just thriving in life. And I had no idea that she was on medication-assisted treatment. And I had a judgment toward it until she told me and came clean and said she had been on it for a year. And I was like, no way. But you are thriving. You are an example. Like, you're in school, you're working, like you're doing all this stuff, And it really changed my perception on it. And also the father of my children, he too went from, heroin and other, substances, and went on to Suboxone. And, I used to be judgmental toward him, but guess what happened? He was able to take care of his children. He was able to go to work every day, pay for a car, pay for an apartment, pay for his children, and take care of his family. And it's like, why am I being judgmental against somebody who's getting their life together, But when I found out that she had been on it for a year, and I had no clue, not one clue, because I was like, oh yeah, you probably get high from it. No, nothing, not one clue. And she was really just striving. Like, it was just, it was so beautiful. And that completely changed my outlook on medication-assisted treatment. So what can we do as a community to destroy the stigma that is associated with it?
So there's probably a few things, I think. I think number one, those of us who use it as a recovery pathway need to educate others about it. the recovery community in general and mental health agencies probably should try to do more public education about it. Because a lot of people have heard of it now, but those who haven't, if they knew it was a viable treatment option, they'd probably be a little more hopeful that maybe one day they could actually stop using.
Yes.
And as far as the stigmatization of it, a lot of that comes from people that just don't understand the statistics and how it works, for another thing. So methadone's been around for a long time, and for a long time it had kind of a bad rap. It's been studied for decades, since the 60s. It's always been a viable way to get people off of opiates, but methadone clinics often were private businesses. They were make money. People didn't come off of methadone a lot, so a lot of people viewed it as trading one addiction for another. But the fact is that the overwhelming evidence shows that methadone is an effective treatment for heroin and other opioid addictions. You, as long as the medication provider is knows what they're doing, they're monitoring you, they're treating you in other ways as well, it becomes a very legitimate treatment. Now, methadone, the difference between methadone and Suboxone is methadone can be mood altering if you take an amount of it that would do that. Suboxone has a ceiling effect. Basically, no matter how much you take, it's not going to make you high if you've already got a pre-existing physical dependency. And that's another thing that people don't understand, because they've seen people take Suboxone and get high, or methadone and get high. And there's a big difference between someone who has, done a few Percocets, in their life, and someone who does 1.5 grams of heroin a day. Which is the case with me. For someone like me, it took about 16 to 32 milligrams of Suboxone a day, just to keep me from going into withdrawals when I first came off the heroin. And, I was honestly still a little bit sick the first few days. So I maintained that amount under the supervision of a doctor. Never felt it once. This is the thing where, people who don't have their medication kind of monitored correctly, and sometimes there's a period where it takes some adjusting to see what amount is right for you, and it's always going to be based on the amount of opiates you were using when you were in active addiction. So for me, it was a lot of opiates. So it took a little bit extra Suboxone. But even the earliest time, about 8 years ago, that I tried a Suboxone because I was sick and didn't have any opiates, I never felt it the first time I tried it. So, but it did make me not sick anymore. It did keep me from being in withdrawal. So the amount will vary for each person. But the important takeaway is that if someone can get on a medication and, the day before they were a heroin junkie, they're homeless, they can get into treatment, go on a medication, and have a job 2 weeks later. And they're not sticking a needle in their arm and risking killing themselves every single day. That harm reduction, the difference between sticking a needle in your arm and taking a medication and being monitored by a physician, that's a huge difference. A really big difference. And it's a quality of life issue. So for me, the fact that I kind of knew about the medication was fortunate, and that I knew that's what it would take for me, because I just wasn't going to be able to maintain being in withdrawal for several weeks, and then post-acute withdrawal for several months potentially. My mind would have never had a chance to rest and get the treatment and the counseling or get the benefits of it, because my body would be too sick to let me do that. I'd constantly be thinking about going back out and making myself feel better. Where Suboxone, methadone, and other medication-assisted treatment, there's also Withdrawal, which is like just a blocker, which will also is for alcoholism and other things. For me, it gave me the time to kind of heal, to start working again, to just not have that time where I'm just sick and going crazy, where I was
Right.
wondering what I was going to do about that, where I could really focus on the treatment and the recovery part.
Yes.
I want to say too, like a lot of the stigmatization also comes from like people in 12-step programs who believe that abstinence is the only way to recovery, which is a legitimate viewpoint, and that's how they work their programs, which I totally respect. But you know, they also don't exactly know and have all the facts about medication-assisted treatment.
Absolutely.
And, you know, most of them were not heroin addicts who are saying that, you know, you should be able to do this without that. They don't know what it's like. And the couple heroin addicts in the program that do say that generally are people who had to get clean in jail, which I really feel for them.
Right.
But it wasn't an option for them, and I don't blame them for having that viewpoint. You should have to do it too, because that's how I had to do it. But I guarantee if they'd been given a choice, you know, this is probably how it would have happened. And it really is a miracle drug for those with serious opioid dependency problems nowadays.
And it's just like for us to just asking questions and being honest, like, hey, this is how I feel about this. Tell me what it is. Where is my, you know, where is my viewpoint wrong in this? You know, for us to say, hey, you know, this is what I honestly feel about it, or this is what I honestly think about it, you know, and it's okay to not know.
Yeah.
It's okay.
It's okay to ask.
Yeah. It's better for us to not know and ask than to just pass a judgment and make it harder for people trying to recover, just like everybody else. You know, we're all on the same team. We're all on the same journey, whatever our pathway is. So, I just want to strongly suggest that anybody who does have an idea about medication-assisted treatment, or a thought or a judgment, or they think it's, you know, has some kind of negative like connotation about it, that you just ask and ask to be educated about it. It's okay not to know. It's okay. So, tell us lastly, what advice would you give to a person who is considering recovery?
Well, do it. I mean, for me, recovery has changed my entire life. So I have a job now. I have a place to live. I got a driver's license back after 8 or 9 years. I have a relationship with my son again. I'm about to reopen my custody case with him. He's going to come live with me in the next year.
Yay.
I mean, these are huge, amazing things for a drug addict who was homeless 2 years ago.
Death to life.
Right, exactly. Right.
Yes.
So, you know, I'd encourage anybody who's struggling with a problem, just the hardest step is the first step, which is asking for help, admitting that you need it. For me, it was patently obvious that I had to have help. Like I'd been using for 26 years. So the heroin and opiate addiction was just the last 11 years, which happened to be the worst part of it. Like I hit multiple what they call rock bottoms. So by this point, I was just so ready for a change that I knew that I did not know how to do it. I knew that I had no answers. I knew that everything I thought of before was not going to work. And fortunately, when it was suggested to me, I was like, yes, treatment, of course. And there are treatment options for people that don't have money. To see, one of my kind of missions going forward is to educate people about the options they have for treatment, where I think a lot of people think the same way that I do, that you need to have a lot of money, that you have to have health insurance, that it's hard to get into. Now, sometimes, obviously, there's going to be a waiting list, but there's so many treatment facilities now and residential facilities. Lots of them are working programs like I was in, where you can pay a relatively reasonable admissions fee. $500 was mine. And in the case of my program, they're willing to take people and just have a balance, you know, where you can get in for free. So you know, and Athens just happens to be a huge place for that. There's so many
Yes.
recovery residences
Yes.
out here. And I never knew
Absolutely.
that. I might have like gotten on the internet a little sooner.
Right.
Had I known how many treatment facilities were just
Yes.
in Athens alone.
What an awesome community that there
And
is
the
here.
big cities
Yeah.
like Atlanta, where I came from, you know, there's a lot of places, but I think that with it being a city that large, a lot of people are trying to get into them, right? So you feel kind of hopeless. Like, I want treatment, but
Right.
I can't get into any of these places, or I have to be there at 5 a.m. and wait in
Right.
the line, and then I'm probably still not going to get in. Like the free
Yes.
places, or the places that'll just take you, they also a lot of times don't offer any kind of medication-assisted treatment, so that discourages a lot of opiate addicts.
Right.
But there are a lot of great places for alcoholics, you know, other drug addicts. So, you know, recovery is just something that that potentially can take a person with no hope, no emotions left. In my case,
Yes.
no
Yes.
desire to you know, recovery kind of changes all those things. It instills you with a little bit of self-awareness, a little bit of perspective about the things you've been doing wrong and how you can change them. And hope was the biggest thing that I gained from recovery. Like, it's not a crazy idea to me now that I might own a house one day. I own a
Yes.
vehicle now, which that was an impossibility, which, you know, for people, like, owning a car is not that crazy of an idea. For me, that was the furthest, like, I could never imagine that when I was looking for things around the house to pawn to get $20 to get another fix. So,
Right.
you know, owning a vehicle is huge. You know, having a relationship with my son's huge. Recovery has done a lot of things for me that I just never thought possible.
Yes.
And, you know, I just had to be willing to admit that I needed it and needed some help and had to ask somebody for it. And then I got some answers. You know, there's a lot of people out there willing to help.
Yes. Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing your testimony. And we will see you next time, you guys. This is Recovery Inspired Hope Friday Night Live.